All right, so moving on to the news this week. Analogue had promised to release their version 1.1 update in July, and they did not disappoint. They got close. They got right to the line, 29th of July, when they announced all the changes, and it's caused a little bit of controversy, this whole space. So just bringing up the screen now. So Analogue has announced their Open FPGA program. So this is really pissing a lot of people off. So it's quite interesting in that retro FPGA community. Again, FPGA, just at a high level, it's hardware emulation that is a lot more accurate than software emulation generally. So it's almost reference quality where you pretty much can't tell the difference between the arcade or the console, and the Analogue Pocket or the Mister is another massive FPGA product. So just in terms of the updates that they provided, like I thought overall, very mixed is my response, but mixed in a way that some really, really cool stuff and then some stuff that I was pretty disappointed about in the end. So in terms of the Open FPGA announcement, very much they want to try to bring as many, consoles, retro, arcade computers to the Analogue Pocket as possible, which is pretty insane given the price point of the device. It's still about $220, which is extremely reasonable given if you want to get something comparable in a Mister setup, it's, $400-500, and it's all stuff you have to make yourself as well. So, this is all sort of been put together and it's dedicated to playing games. And they actually started with, strangely enough, but kind of cool in a way, with Space War. So Space War being technically the very first video game ever made. And you can actually install this now with the updated Analogue Pocket, install this for free as a core on the Analogue Pocket and play it, which I did. And, it's kind of as you expect. It's not that great. There's no RPG mechanics in it, so Swinny wouldn't have any interest in it.
Hey, I played the Space War before in the past when I was a kid. So.
There you go.
Yeah, there was like a museum exhibit and it had it set up there. So
yeah, I was wondering if that's where you played it, like in Melbourne, right? They had that exhibit.
I can't remember if it was Melbourne, but yeah, it was something like that. So.
And probably the biggest update. So previously, what they'd always said about, if you want to be a developer and develop for the Analogue Pocket, you'll get access to this Cyclone 10 FPGA, which I think a lot of people were like, okay, that's not going to be enough for a lot of consoles and even like handhelds, because, just at a high level, these logic elements, based on how the Mister project has gone about, if you're looking at something like a Neo Geo, it needs around 30,000 logic elements. But with the updates that they've done with this Open FPGA program, they've actually allowed both of the FPGAs that are on the Analogue Pocket to be accessible for developers. So theoretically, you could actually combine these two units together to get you 65,000. And it's not a direct one-to-one comparison. Like some of these are sort of a little bit better than the Mister project. Other things are not. So it's going to be really interesting to see what develops with Analogue and just, what's actually going to sort of, spew out from it. But we've already started to see some people port things to it, which includes the Neo Geo, which is kind of insane to me. So there's actually an Aussie guy. I don't know if I've got his name at hand. I should have prepped up earlier, but this Aussie guy actually ported an existing project that, emulates effectively the Neo Geo onto the Analogue Pocket in an alpha version. And, he's got games like Windjammers running on it, Metal Slug, and it's kind of insane that like they've started with Neo Geo. So in terms of what we could see in this space, pretty much everything up to the 16-bit era is pretty much in scope. So it looks like we'll definitely get the SNES, NES, Game Gear, all of those things. And the other thing that sort of happened is they've actually got, and it's kind of like, it's one of those weird things with Analogue, what they do. So we were all waiting for the Jailbreak, because that's what previously they've done with Analogue systems. This time, given that they've got this Open FPGA sort of setup, instead of a jailbreak, some random person,
Oh, I wonder who it
definitely
is.
wouldn't be Kevtress, who worked
Oh,
on
no.
the actual cores,
Oh no.
released a Game Boy Color core and a Game Boy Advance core. So you'd be very happy, Mike. You can now play any ROMs for Game Boy Color, Game Boy, I think you're on mute, and Game Boy Advance on the Analogue Pocket now.
Wasn't it?
I would do no such thing, but that is good to know.
This is where you sat on your pocket or something. No, I love, wasn't it like within the hour or something of the update going live, like that stuff was up on GitHub or something. It was like ridiculous. Like it was just, I love the blatant, like, oh, someone did this, some anonymous person.
It's so...
Hey, allegedly, let's say it's all speculation. I don't
Yeah, well, we're not saying it, but
I
allegedly,
literally saying
right?
an anonymous person.
Well, it's kind of even worse, right? Because Analog officially released this Space War core, right? So the very first video game, 1962, and it was released under a brand new GitHub account, and it was called like Spaceman 3. Then then someone, it was like Specialized 1997,
Yeah, I
released Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance cores. Now, the only thing that's interesting about that, it's just such a coincidence that Spaceman 3, there was literally a band called Spaceman 3 in the UK. There's like a psychedelic jazz band. And then they renamed themselves to Specialized, right? And there was like an album that came out in 1997 or some shit like that, right?
Coincidence?
It's so on the nose. And that person also randomly had prepared all the image sets for every single Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance game and released it on Reddit, because you couldn't do that legally if you're analog, but just some helpful person. And they passed all the information that you need to know about the Pocket that just got released. It's just amazing coincidence.
And I think I saw something like there was a Discord post from Kevtris. I hear people are liking the update or something like 3 hours after it went live or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is what people were waiting for, like to be able to play games off the SD and not need to have the actual, a cartridge. And I must admit, like just playing it myself, now that I don't have a cartridge there, pressing L and R is just so much easier, given where they're placed, because it was always bumping. My fingers were always bumping up against where the cartridge was. So it's, from a usability perspective, it's actually kind of a little bit better. Along with that update, they've made a bunch of updates that they've been flagging around, this memory system and the library system, which is almost like the history of these games. Now that it's kind of coming to life, it feels like it makes even less sense. I didn't think it made sense in the first place, but I've got like Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. You plug them in, and it's sort of like, it does tell you, like it gives you a picture of the game and everything, but I just don't get it. Like, I don't absolutely see the point of it. It seems just so pointless to me, because I get it. Maybe the only use case I can think of is if I'm at a game store and I'm like, oh shit, I want to make sure this is like an authentic copy maybe. But I think you can counterfeit it anyway. So
there's no way to set it up so you can actually launch the games from there with this new setup?
So with the OpenFPGA stuff, it's like, it's just a list that you just click into the game. So that would be cool if it was like that, but it's not. So it's generally like you plug in the game and it tells you a little bit about the game. I'm like, cool. Like, it seems, why is that such a big feature they're spending so much time on? It just feels like a bit of a miss. Huge update is around the memory stuff. It's a bit clunky the way it works, but effectively the way it was working, the Analogue Pocket, you had like one save state and it was a bit dicey. It didn't work. It was very beta. Like, didn't work perfectly each time, right? Now there's like 128 slots. So it's way more usable. Like, it's actually, and it's got an interface now that you can actually go through and select. It's really useful. Like, I actually have been using that a lot. I feel like I'm using my Pocket a lot more since the update. Like, and I can see myself using it a lot more as well.
Question back on something you were saying before about like the logic. What are they? The logic elements.
Logic elements, yeah.
So, and you're saying that potentially, like up until like the Neo Geo might be like the max in regards to like the 16-bit stuff. Like I know with the Mister, like they've done like the PlayStation cores and stuff like that. Is that something that realistically like, you have to write off? It could never do like basic PlayStation, even early PlayStation stuff. Is that just never possible with this?
I think it would like take such a massive. Like, I think the answer is it's unlikely. Because the thing is, PlayStation getting on the Mister was originally thought like, okay, that would never happen.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, it's still not perfect, by the way, but it's like, okay, it seems like it's achievable. And they're pushing it to like things like Saturn. Like they think the Saturn might be able to run on it, and that's pretty much the end of it. Not like the 64. You wouldn't be able to get the 64 on the Mister. I think if you take those two consoles off the table, I've got a list here. It's a bit, I can't zoom in on it, unfortunately, but it does show like you've got like SNES. Strangely enough, the SNES, because of all the, you know how the SNES has all the specialized chips that come in the cartridges? It's actually more complicated than the Neo Geo. Neo Geo is all the way down here. So like things like the Game Boy Advance, the NES, because that also has a bunch of specialized chips. So the Neo Geo, strangely enough, like it's simpler from a logic element point of view, but the challenge that they'll have with the Neo Geo is the actual games have so much, memory that they need. It's more than the actual Pocket has. So they'll have to play some really interesting tricks to get it all working. But essentially, when you look at this list, even the 486 computer theoretically can run on the Analogue Pocket. So you could actually get Windows XP. Maybe in the future, someone will boot Windows XP, and then like Windows games.
XP on it for it.
I'll play Red Alert with no sound against Joe Jives, like reliving the 486 days.
Fallout, maybe finally play Fallout on a handheld.
But this is where it's getting interesting because you've got the Misto project. So again, open source ish. It's not purely open source, which is like a bit of contention for me, but open source ish program. Lots of people on Patreon supporting devs, like producing the cores for Mister. And it's a fairly straightforward process to get them on the Pocket, as demonstrated by how quickly this Aussie guy who just got his hands on the stuff was able to port even a fairly broken but not perfect version of the Neo Geo core. And the community is like, there's some people are just like livid, like, don't support Analogue. You're doing work for them for free. What are you doing? Don't port the cores. Like, and I kind of get that, but at the same time, you're doing it for a free project anyway. Like, you know what I mean? I don't understand. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not following. I can understand. It just feels like tribalism to me. I don't know if you guys.
So there's core wars happening. The Mister versus Analog. They're going to be
I like that.
coming
Core
up the front lines.
Yeah, core wars.
Core Wars. I like the name of that.
Like people are getting really animated about it, and I just personally, like, okay, don't support Analog, but then why are you supporting Mister? You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to me. I think the argument is like no one makes money on the Mister, but it's like okay, but I just don't get it. Like I don't get the logic of it. If you don't want to port it, don't port it. Don't do work if you don't want to do it. But I think people are going to really enjoy it. And if you already got a Patreon and people want to support that for you to develop and port them to the Analog, it kind of makes a lot of sense to me. So I think it's very inevitable that you'll start to see, everything coming across to Analog, which for me, selfishly, is pretty good because I do like how the Analogue Pocket works. And then just going back to some of the interesting parts of it. So the dock got updated as well. I think, Swinny, you ordered the dock, right?
Yeah, I've got the dock coming one day.
Yeah, I know you're going to get next year.
2025.
So with the dock now, you can actually support up to 4 players. So it's, they've already, it's interesting, 4 players, but there are no cores that support 4 players. So they're already like prepping for when people port stuff like Bomberman.
Very nice.
Like, honestly, that's such a cool way to play it, I think. Like, if you had like an Analogue Pocket plugged into a TV playing Bomberman 4 players, that's kind of insane to me.
It's really cool.
And kind of going to the things I don't like as much again is, man, like this support, like the DAC support. So the DAC, just to remind everyone, that's the ability to show it on a CRT. I was really keen to use that. They still can't support that. So that's supposedly coming in September. And then, simple things like button mapping, you still can't do. So that's also going to be in September. So a whole bunch of stuff is still in train, hopefully getting delivered by the end of the year. you
So
know,
by the time Swinny gets his, it's going to be a proper fully fledged
Oh,
working.
You're gonna be able to run PS3 games by the time. I
Oh,
bloody get
easily
mine.
by then.
I-
PS3.
'cause you're
Can't even,
getting
like,
a-
PS5 by then.
you're getting it next year, right, Swinny?
I don't know when it's gonna come.
I think that's when it's
I
due.
don't know.
But you're gonna get it. I reckon by that time they'll have the NES, the SNES. Like they'll have, because currently there's also like funny things like you can't use the. You know how you've got the alternative screen modes where it shows you like the original Game Boy looking mode.
Oh yeah.
You can't do that if you use the Open FPGA. You know, whatever you want to call it. Those cores.
But honestly, like I've got a lot of cartridges that I play
Sure,
on it as well.
sure.
So yeah.
But yeah, tracking tools. I kind of like that kind of stuff. You know, how long did I play these games for? You can't do any of those things with the current version. So all of them will be ready to go by the time that you're going live with it. So yeah, look, like overall, very, very good update. Because, you know, I'm definitely going to be playing the Analogue Pocket a lot more now that it just sort of works in a way that it should have, unfortunately, probably worked from the start. But, you know, people like Swinny are going to see the benefit of it. And Mike, I think you'll be able to enjoy your Pocket a lot more. So you should update it.
I absolutely will update it. I've used my Anbernic, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is like a Pocket, I guess. Only it can do most shit because it doesn't have those restrictions because it's not a proper FPGA device. I'm also just related to hardware and stuff halfway through building, well, moving all my parts to another PC, which you can maybe see if you're actually tuning in on YouTube. It's still in pieces. In a new case. So looking forward to, maybe I'll do a review
Cool.
on the case.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Do you want to?
Cool story, bros. More like
All
it.
right. Over to you, host.
Right.